Hey guys, tonight we wander through a world where the sky isn't just weather. It's Zeus tossing lightning bolts in a fit of divine irritation. You're about to enter a place where every mountain has a secret, every echo tells a story, and every strange shadow in the woods might just be a nymph who didn't want to be found. You might not survive this one, but hey, who really does in Greek mythology? So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing how far our little Twilight circle reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into the Greek world not as a historian, not as a tourist, but as someone trying to make sense of the madness. And the first thing you notice, myth is everywhere. You look up and see the jagged outline of Mount Olympus, except it's not just rock and sky, it's where the gods live. Not metaphorically, literally. You can practically hear Hera arguing with Zeus from the summit. See, the Greeks didn't use myths just for bedtime. They used them to explain why your crops failed, why storms killed sailors, or why your neighbor suddenly turned into a tree. It's not science. They didn't need science. They had stories. Like the story of Echo, who could only repeat the last things said to her. She wasn't just some poetic metaphor for longing. She was a punishment. Narcissus rejected her, and the gods, being Greek gods, decided that poetic torment was the only suitable consequence. And the gods? They were busy. Always watching, always judging, and occasionally, just for fun, turning into swans, bulls, or random bursts of golden light. It makes you wonder if the weather forecast back then wasn't cloudy with a chance of rain, but stormy with a chance of divine mischief. Even natural disasters had names. Earthquakes weren't just tectonic plate shifts. They were Poseidon slamming his trident into the seabed because someone forgot to offer enough goats. You begin to realize, as you tiptoe through ancient groves and sun-warmed stone paths, that mythology wasn't entertainment. It was survival logic. And then there's the weird stuff, like the chimera, part lion, part goat, part snake. You'd think one terrifying animal would be enough, but no. The Greeks liked their nightmares in bundles. Or Typhon, the storm giant whose 100 heads made even the gods pack up and run for it. Fun fact, during that legendary battle, Dionysus supposedly turned into a goat and fled Egypt. You won't see that in Sunday school. Academics still argue whether these monsters were symbols, metaphors, or just ancient horror stories told after too much wine. Some think the Hydra represented challenges that couldn't be solved by brute force alone. Others think it was just an awesome excuse to draw a snake with 9 heads. But here's something oddly comforting. Mythology gave the Greeks control. Not literal control, but narrative control. You couldn't stop a storm, but if you believed it was Zeus being moody, at least you knew who to blame. And if you left a sacrifice, maybe, just maybe, you wouldn't get smote. As you walk deeper into olive groves and crumble-lined amphitheaters, you start to get it. Mythology didn't just explain the world, it made the world feel alive, connected, enchanted, even when it was terrifying. And there's something oddly familiar in all this, isn't there? You remember being a kid, afraid of the dark, and what made you feel better? Stories. Something whispered, something bigger than fear. The Greeks weren't so different. Even now, standing in this dusty trail of history, you still feel the presence of those stories. The rustling wind isn't just wind. It might be Pan, that wild woodland god with goat legs and a grin, dancing just out of sight. You don't have to believe in him. But tonight, it's more fun if you do. You keep walking, the dusty path crunching beneath your sandals. Okay, imaginary sandals. And as twilight deepens, something odd happens. You start hearing things, not voices exactly, but echoes of stories. Tales passed down through centuries. Whispers that say, "This is why the stars shimmer the way they do," or "This is why that mountain looks like it's watching you." And suddenly, you get it. Why the Greeks weren't just fascinated by mythology, they were obsessed. Myth wasn't a hobby, it was infrastructure. Every town, every island, every pebble had a god, a spirit, a story. You couldn't toss a rock in the Aegean without accidentally hitting a minor deity. And if you did, you'd better apologize quickly or find yourself growing donkey ears overnight. Take Delphi. To you, it might just be another ancient ruin, but back then, it was the literal center of the universe. According to the myth, Zeus sent two eagles flying in opposite directions, and they met over Delphi. So naturally, that's where Apollo parked his sacred oracle. And the oracle, Pythia, wasn't just a fortune cookie with a robe. She inhaled vapors from a crack in the earth, possibly volcanic gases, entered a trance, and spoke in riddles. Kings, generals, and clueless philosophers lined up to ask her what to do. She told Croesus he would destroy a great empire if he attacked Persia. He did, and guess whose empire got wrecked? Yep, his own. You start to wonder if ambiguity was the Greeks' favorite form of divine humor. It was like getting a horoscope that said, "Today will be full of surprises, some pleasant, some involving angry gods and goat transformations." But it wasn't just temples and oracles. Theater, one of the greatest Greek contributions to the world, was soaked in myth. You didn't go to a play for light comedy. You went to watch Oedipus realize he'd married his mom. You went to feel terror, pity, and catharsis, then maybe discuss it over olives and wine. And the myths were sticky. They clung to everything. A war wasn't just politics, it was divine chess. When Troy fell, it wasn't because of strategy, it was because of a beauty contest between goddesses. Paris gave the golden apple to Aphrodite, who offered him the love of Helen. Never mind, she was already married. Result, 10-year war, wooden horse, flaming city. Moral of the story, don't judge goddesses, ever. Academic debates still swirl around how much the Greeks believed in their myths. Were they literalists? Skeptics? Somewhere in between. Some say mythology was always metaphor. Others argue it was deadly serious. Maybe both. Maybe they knew the gods were imaginary but treated them like they weren't. Just in case. And here's a weird tidbit. Many Greek festivals were like chaotic divine fan conventions. At the Dionysia, people got drunk, dressed as satyrs, and watched mythological tragedies. It was half religious ceremony, half rowdy open mic night. You imagine trying to explain this to your modern boss. "Sorry, I can't come to work. I'm worshiping Dionysus by wearing goat pants and yelling at the moon." Still, there's something beautiful in that ritual chaos. The Greeks weren't trying to control everything. They were dancing with mystery. They knew the world was big, unpredictable, sometimes cruel, and instead of hiding from it, they told stories that helped them lean in. And through it all, there's a kind of cosmic intimacy. They didn't see a divide between mortal and divine. Gods fell in love, got jealous, made mistakes. Mortals rose to greatness, fell to ruin, occasionally turned into flowers. The boundary was thin, like mist at dawn. You pause on a hilltop and look out over imaginary ruins, flickering torches, stars above. You don't need an oracle to know. Mythology made life feel bigger, stranger, and more meaningful. And in a world without GPS or Google, that mattered. So maybe obsession isn't the right word. Maybe it was devotion, raw, creative, and a little bit bonkers. And maybe, just maybe, we're still not over it. You wake up early in the story now, fog still hugging the fields like a lazy cat. And there's something in the air, not just mist, but meaning. Because today, you realize the Greeks didn't tell myths just for drama or divine scandal. They told them to teach you how to live. And maybe more importantly, how not to. Every hero's journey, every monstrous trial, every questionable romantic decision, it was a lesson, wrapped in the glitter of gods and gorgons. You weren't just entertained, you were being warned. Take Icarus, you know the one. Kid with wax wings, flies too close to the sun, splash. The moral is painfully obvious, even without a toga. Don't let ambition melt your common sense. But here's the thing, you still kind of admire him. He flew, didn't he? At least, until he didn't. The Greeks were masters at this, hiding sharp truths inside poetic tragedy. They didn't always hand you a clear good guy and bad guy either. Hercules, for example, killed his own family in a rage, with help from a particularly vengeful Hera, and then had to complete 12 nearly impossible labors for redemption. He's a hero, sure, but also a walking caution sign, anger issues ahead. And you, wandering through this marble maze of meaning, start to feel something strange, like these stories are holding up a mirror. A distorted mirror, yes, one that includes boar hunts and multi-headed beasts, but a mirror nonetheless. You begin to recognize patterns. Pride always precedes the fall. Promises made to gods rarely end well. And if you ever meet a woman who offers you golden apples, maybe ask some questions first. But mythology didn't just scold, it guided. If you were a kid in Athens, you probably heard the story of Bellerophon, who tried to ride Pegasus to Mount Olympus itself. He almost made it before being thrown off and wandering the earth in shame. Lesson? Know your place. Also, don't try to outshine Zeus. He's sensitive. Historians still argue whether myths were actively moral tools or just reflective tales that people retrofitted with meaning. Were they designed to control behavior, or did people read into them afterward? It's a debate that probably took up half the time at Plato's dinner parties. But here's a fun aside. There were even myths that contradicted each other depending on where you lived. In one village, a god might be a noble protector. In another, a total jerk. Same god, different PR team. That's like if your local weather app said sunny and your friends said plague of locusts. Welcome to Greek storytelling. And while we're at it, can we talk about Theseus? Everyone remembers the Minotaur part, but few recall how he ditched Ariadne on an island afterward. Not exactly heroic boyfriend energy. Still, the myths didn't erase his flaws, they left them in, like a warning label on a handsome action figure. You wander past temple ruins now, real or imagined, and you can almost hear the warnings carved into stone. Don't make oaths you won't keep. Don't spy on goddesses while they bathe. Definitely don't anger Artemis, ever. Yet, amid all these rules, there's a surprising flexibility. The Greeks didn't have a single holy book or central priesthood. Myths were oral, mutable, slippery. They changed like the wind, which probably also had a minor deity in charge. This meant they could adapt with time, reflecting the values and fears of each new generation. And honestly, that's kind of genius. Their myths weren't locked in stone. They were alive, told and retold by candlelight, shouted across amphitheaters, painted on vases, each retelling a chance to explore new angles, insert local jokes, or explain why someone's sheep mysteriously went missing. You settle on a stone bench, figuratively, and take it all in. Myths weren't lectures, they were invitations. They asked you to consider, what kind of person are you? Are you more like Odysseus, clever but occasionally shady? Or more like Orpheus, beautiful voice, terrible at follow-through? The Greeks gave you gods, monsters, and labyrinths, but they also gave you a way to examine yourself. They believed chaos could be navigated with wisdom, that fate could be delayed with courage, and that even tragedy could sparkle with beauty if the lighting was right. And as you yawn, because this is a sleepy story after all, you feel something settling in your chest. Not just lessons, but comfort. Because maybe you'll never fight a sea serpent or duel a god disguised as a goose, but you will make choices, face fears, fall in love, and probably mess up now and then. And when you do, you'll remember the Greeks were here first, and they left you a map drawn in myth, lit by firelight. By now, you're deep in it. Not just the myths, but the world that birthed them. The streets of Athens feel worn smooth beneath your steps. Olive trees whisper their ancient lullabies, and you're starting to notice that everything was part of a divine pattern. Nothing happened by accident. In the Greek mind, myth wasn't an escape from reality. It was reality. The stars above, not just gas and gravity, they were stories pinned into the heavens. Orion, the hunter, locked in eternal chase. Cassiopeia, forever punished for her vanity. Even the Milky Way got a backstory. It was Hera's spilled breast milk. Bit of an overshare, maybe, but undeniably cosmic. And every corner of life had its mythic logic. Marriage, that was Zeus and Hera, an eternal soap opera. War, that was Ares stomping through fields in a bad mood. Love, that was Eros, shooting arrows with suspicious accuracy and absolutely no consent. You, standing there with your sandals probably full of metaphorical sand, realize that myth didn't just explain the world, it animated it, turned it into a stage where every tree, every storm, every awkward dinner was part of a play written by invisible hands. And let's be honest, it's a lot more fun blaming a bad day on Apollo than on your own poor time management. There's a comfort in that, a kind of spiritual weather report. You could prepare for life's chaos by knowing the divine players involved. Lost a bet? Hermes tricked you. Got dumped? Aphrodite's jealous. Ate too much cheese? Definitely Dionysus. The Greeks didn't see gods as distant, perfect beings. They were messy, moody, and occasionally turned people into spiders. And somehow, that made them more relatable. The divine wasn't about worship from a distance. It was about navigating a relationship, one that might involve offerings, festivals, or just knowing when to shut up and not offend Athena. Here's something deliciously weird.
They even mythologized their own history. Take the Trojan War. Scholars still debate whether it actually happened. Some say yes, others say it was a mashup of several conflicts. But to the Greeks, it had to be true. How else would you explain the glory of Achilles or the trickery of Odysseus? And yes, historians love to squabble over this stuff. Was Homer a single guy or a committee of bards? Did the Iliad describe real events or a poetic hallucination? You picture a symposium of toga-wearing scholars arguing over wine, and it honestly sounds like a great Friday night. One of the stranger details, the Greeks believed in recurring ages of humanity. We're talking Golden Age, peace, prosperity, Silver Age, lazy disaster, Bronze Age, everyone fights, and then us, the Iron Age, full of toil and injustice. Basically the Greek version of kids these days. You sit under an imaginary fig tree now, the breeze thick with the smell of history, or maybe grilled lamb, and you start to wonder, what if this mythic mindset made people more attentive to the world around them? Like, if you believed every ripple in the water had a story, wouldn't you pay more attention to it? Wouldn't you live with a little more awe? That's what's so infectious about this obsession. It wasn't passive, it was participatory. You didn't just hear myths, you lived them. Every citizen who stepped on stage in a tragedy, every soldier who carried a shield bearing a mythic symbol, every farmer who whispered a prayer to Demeter, they were all part of this vast narrative web. And then there's the idea of fate, so central to Greek mythology it might as well have its own holiday. The Moirae, or Fates, were three sisters who spun, measured, and cut the thread of every life. Not even the gods could escape them. You were born, you lived, you died, and somewhere a cosmic seamstress decided how long your thread would be. Yet, despite this, the Greeks still acted with agency. They still made choices, often spectacularly bad ones. It's like they knew they couldn't outrun fate, but they could at least dance until the thread snapped. You stretch your legs, metaphorically, maybe literally, and feel a sense of strange reverence. Not because the myths were real in the modern sense, but because they were real enough to guide, to warn, to enchant. Real enough to survive the rise and fall of empires. Real enough to still whisper to you here in the hush of a 1,000-year-old night. And if you listen closely, you can almost hear a chorus of ancient voices asking, "What's your myth? What story are you living?"
Somewhere along this mythic trail, you start noticing the cracks. Hairline fractures where myth and philosophy rub shoulders, then wrestle in the dust. Because, surprise, not every Greek was fully sold on the gods hurling thunderbolts and seducing mortals in swan form. You pass the statue of Socrates, well, not literally, but let's pretend, and you hear him muttering, "The unexamined myth is not worth believing." Okay, maybe that's not exactly what he said, but close enough. Philosophy started poking holes in the myth machine, asking questions like, did Zeus really turn into a bull? Or are we just using him as a cosmic scapegoat for questionable dating choices? And yet, mythology didn't vanish. It adapted. The thinkers might have rolled their eyes, but the people kept lighting candles. Festivals still boomed. Playwrights still staged tragedies where heroes begged mercy from unseen forces. The myth never left the bloodstream. It just changed flavor. The myths also grew self-aware. Like that time Euripides, bless his theatrical heart, wrote the Bacchae, a brutal cautionary tale about doubting Dionysus. Spoiler, the guy who questioned the god gets torn apart by his own mom. Lesson: never critique a wine god during a party. The Greeks knew how to play with irony centuries before it became a Twitter personality. And here's something your modern brain might appreciate. Greek myths weren't clean. They didn't always reward virtue or punish vice. Sometimes the innocent suffered. Sometimes the arrogant thrived. It wasn't fair, and that was the point. The gods didn't do morality. They did chaos, drama, and the occasional lightning stunt. Still, myths offered structure in a chaotic world. They provided a mental filing cabinet. Thunder equals Zeus. Grain equals Demeter. What is love equals Ask Aphrodite, or Hathaway centuries later. When your crops failed or your kid got sick, you had a story to hold on to. And if the story didn't help, well, at least you weren't alone in the dark. You wander into a dusty amphitheater now, the air thick with imagined incense and theatrical projection. You see figures painted on ancient vases, Achilles dragging Hector, Medea holding a poisoned chalice, Narcissus gazing too long into the mirror. These weren't just stories. They were rituals, and the Greeks loved a good ritual. Here's the twist. Most of those rituals weren't about believing in literal truth. They were about participating. You offered grapes to Dionysus not because you feared divine punishment, but because the act connected you to something older, deeper, your ancestors, your land, your place in the great cosmic mess. Even politics got mythologized. Rulers traced their bloodlines back to demigods. Cities built their identities around local legends. Athens had Athena, of course, but also a whole cast of civic myths to justify why they were definitely better than Sparta. Myth became PR, and it worked. And while historians still debate whether the Greeks believed their myths or just used them, that question might be missing the point. Because sometimes belief isn't about facts, it's about function. The myth did what it needed to do: explain, comfort, inspire, entertain, terrify. Try asking TikTok to do all that in under a minute. Some of the weirdest myths had the deepest roots, like the tale of the Chimera, a fire-breathing creature with the head of a lion, the body of a goat, and the tail of a serpent. Basically, nature's weird animal combo platter. Did anyone ever see a chimera? Probably not. But did everyone understand what it meant? Oh yes, don't mess with the unnatural. You pause now, mid-mental journey, and notice how familiar it all feels. Not just the myths, but the human need to wrap confusion in narrative. The impulse to tell a story when faced with the inexplicable. Your ancestors might have called it Poseidon. You call it a weather system. Either way, you still mutter under your breath when it rains on your only day off. Because in the end, mythology wasn't about ancient people being naive. It was about people being people. Seeing patterns in the stars, finding meaning in suffering, laughing at the gods because otherwise you'd cry. And as you lean back into the story, eyelids heavy, you realize The Greeks weren't obsessed with mythology because they had to be. They were obsessed because it was beautiful, useful, and, above all, true in the way that feels true. The way that wraps around your bones and lingers long after the fire's gone out.
The moon hangs heavy over the ancient landscape of your mind now, casting long shadows across temples and olive groves. You've walked through myth and memory, gods and ghosts, and somehow it all still pulses beneath the skin of the modern world. The obsession, you realize, never really left. It just put on new clothes. You open your eyes, figuratively, maybe literally, and look around your own world. Streaming services full of demigods, blockbusters starring lightning-wielding heroes, school curriculum still making kids memorize the labors of Hercules. The Greek myths are everywhere, still strutting across the stage in surprisingly good shape for something over 2,500 years old. Why? Because they speak to something permanent in us. Fear, wonder, love, pride, revenge. These aren't ancient emotions. They're just human. And the Greeks had a flair for turning the human into the divine, the mundane into the mythic. You stub your toe and curse the floorboard. The Greeks would have blamed a household spirit, made a little offering, and written a poem about it. But it's not just the stories that stick. It's the way they taught people to think, to question, to sit at the edge of a mystery and not demand a neat answer, to wrestle with fate even if fate wins. That's not just mythology, that's philosophy in costume jewelry. One of the strangest and oddly comforting truths, the myths contradict each other. One version says Orpheus turned back to look at Eurydice. Another says she tripped, or that he never should have tried at all. You'd think that would be frustrating, but actually, it's liberating, because it means there's space for you inside the myth, room for interpretation, for disagreement, for growth. Historians, of course, still can't agree on everything. Some say the myths were a form of social control. Others argue they were coded lessons, helping people navigate trauma and transition. One scholar even suggested they were just really elaborate dream journals. Honestly fair.
And then there's the whole idea of catharsis. The ancient belief that watching a tragedy helped purge you emotionally. That by weeping with Oedipus or raging with Medea, you'd come out lighter, cleaner. Like myth was a kind of emotional laundry machine, spinning your soul until it smelled slightly less like despair. You sit now, not on marble steps, but maybe in a soft chair or curled under blankets. And you feel it, don't you? The myth is still working, still doing its job. Even in the telling, something has shifted inside you. A thread tightened, a silence deepened, a question formed, not to be answered, but held. And here's the irony the Greeks would have appreciated. For all their obsession with gods, they understood something deeply human, that the stories we tell shape the lives we live, that belief is a form of creation, that the divine might be unreachable, but the mythic, that's always within reach, in your words, your dreams, the way you look up at the stars and whisper a name just in case someone's listening. So yes, the Greeks were obsessed. But maybe obsession is just love with a better costume. And if you're still listening, still curled in that soft darkness, then maybe you are too. Let that obsession comfort you. Let it fill the spaces between the logical and the lived. Let it stretch out into the hush of this night, gently like a lyre note fading in temple air. Now, slow everything down. Breathe a little deeper, a little longer. Imagine the soft flicker of torchlight on a temple wall, the sound of waves echoing across a myth-laced shore. Let the gods drift away, their stories tucked gently into the folds of your mind. The ancient voices grow quieter now. Less like thunder, more like lullabies. You are safe. You are still. You are floating on the edge of dreams where logic softens and wonder takes the wheel. Let your body melt into the sheets. Let your thoughts untangle like a scroll unrolling in warm candlelight. You've traveled far tonight. There's nowhere else you need to be.